Hey everyone, welcome back to the realm. I'll be your guide beyond Waking Realm. Today, we're diving into the meaning behind Lies of P, the philosophy of humanity, on the entirety of the game and the DLC, Overture. While replaying Lies of P several times, I realized something strange about his story. At first glance, it looks like a dark reimagining of Pinocchio, a gothic city, a puppet uprising, a mysterious illness spreading through Krat. But beneath all that, the game is quietly asking a much deeper question. Not about puppets, not about monsters, but about humanity itself. Because the longer you spend in Krat, the stranger the world becomes. The creatures who behave the most human are the puppets. And the people who claim to be human often behave like machines. So tonight, I want to explore the deeper philosophy behind Lies of P and its DLC, Overture. Not just the events that happen in Krat, but the ideas hiding underneath the story. Because by the end of this game, the real question isn't whether P becomes human. The real question is whether humanity itself deserved to survive. The fall of Krat. Before we even talk about P, we need to talk about Krat. Krat is a city built on progress, technology, industry, innovation. But like many stories inspired by the Industrial Revolution, Krat represents something darker as well. Human ambition without restraint. The city believed it could control life, control machines, control the future itself. And for a while, it seemed like they worked. Puppets became servants, workers, caretakers, protectors. Humanity believed it had mastered creation, at least the alchemists did. But history has a way of reminding us that control is always temporary, and in Krat, that illusion collapses all at once. It took time, and somehow, some way, the alchemists who already had a reigning time of ruling on their isle had a upper hierarchy, and things had went along, and then Krat was actually like a fish village, a fisherman of sorts, and they came over because of their greed. They found out that something that they needed and wanted. And by the end of everything, whether it was being torn up from the inside of the Isle of Alchemists or not, it happened in a moment of some time, and yet in a matter of moments. The Grand Covenant. The entire puppet system was built around something called the Grand Covenant, a set of laws every puppet was bound to obey. Puppets cannot harm humans. Puppets must obey their creators. Puppets cannot lie. Those rules ensure that puppets would remain tools, machines, extensions of human will. But something begins to break. The puppet frenzy spreads through Krat. Puppets begin attacking their creators, and suddenly, the rules appear to have failed. But the deeper story suggests something far more unsettling. The puppets didn't break the rules, they simply began interpreting them differently. Programming versus consciousness. This is where the story becomes fascinating. Because the puppet frenzy isn't simply a malfunction. It's the beginning of awakening. Many of the puppets begin developing something unexpected. Memory, emotion, identity. They begin to question their purpose, and the moment a machine begins questioning its purpose, it stops being just a machine. This is the moment where the story begins to blur the line between artificial life and real humanity, because suddenly the puppets are struggling with the same questions humans struggle with. Who am I? Why do I exist? What does it mean to be alive? The meaning of lies. One of the most brilliant ideas in the entire game revolves around lying. Puppets are not supposed to lie. It's one of the core laws of their existence. But P begins breaking that rule almost immediately. At first, the lies feel small, simple dialogue choices, but the more you play, the more you realize something strange. Every lie P tells is motivated by compassion. You lie to comfort someone. You lie to protect someone from grief. You lie to give someone peace in their final moments. And slowly, the meaning of the game's title begins to shift, because in Krat, truth often causes pain, but lies can offer mercy. And now for a moment you're gonna say, well, the game's title, it means something else. And yes, without going into too much, because that's not the main concern of this narration and story, but it could interpret into two people. In this case, we're talking about Geppetto's puppet, P. And I honestly, my second playthrough, when I was not lying, it broke my heart a lot of times, because I was telling Antonia, mispronouncing her name, but we know who you're talking about, the lady at the hotel. I told her flat out that she was not beautiful. I was like, oh my gosh, like, can we not just not say anything? But, you know, we had to lie. The paradox of compassion. This creates a powerful philosophical paradox. We are taught that lying is immoral, but the game constantly presents situations where honesty would only cause suffering. So the player is forced to make a difficult decision. Do you follow strict logic, or do you follow empathy? And that choice slowly transforms P, because every compassionate lie pushes him further away from machine logic and closer to something human. Romeo, the tragic king. One of the most misunderstood characters in the story is Romeo, the king of puppets. When we first encounter him, he appears to be the mastermind behind the chaos, the leader of the puppet uprising. But the truth is devastating. Romeo wasn't trying to destroy humanity, he was trying to save it. He discovered the truth behind the petrification disease. He saw how human experimentation had pushed Krat to the edge of collapse. And he realized that humanity was on a path to destroying itself. So Romeo attempted something radical. He tried to stop humanity from continuing down that path. But humanity misunderstood him completely, in a sense. Because in his perspective and mind, he understood that we the puppets are somehow controlled under the grand covenant of Geppetto, and we were used by him. And even though if his subconscious was still alive, in a sense, knowing he was controlled, and yet at the same time, he knew that even if he was working under Geppetto, he wanted to save the humans, and they needed to fight the carcasses. And mostly the alchemists. And he tried to warn us. He tried to somehow, some way send out different puppets that came across our path to warn us about Geppetto, and especially with the first playthrough, you couldn't understand them, and you couldn't understand him. Romeo as a mirror. Romeo represents something incredibly important in the story. He is what P might have become, a puppet who awakens to the truth. But unlike P, Romeo awakens too early. He sees humanity's corruption before he sees humanity's potential for compassion, and because of that, he loses hope. Romeo becomes a tragic reflection of what happens when understanding arrives without forgiveness. There were times when I was thinking about it while playing the game. If Romeo's trying to warn us, why is he not trying to fight us, right? Because he could have easily not fought us. Maybe there would have been a cutscene if you lost to Romeo and you're just captured, but instead you still die, right? And like, maybe he couldn't fight the Grand Covenant and the law against Geppetto, the creator. Maybe while revealing and seeing what's going on, it's like at the same time, could they sense the carcass inside the humans before it activated? I'm not sure. I felt like they explained in the game that it did. I'm still looking into it, but it's not really clear. It's up to your interpretation whether they kill the humans thinking they were all infected, or some of them only infected. Geppetto's obsession. Then we come to Geppetto, the man who claims to be P's father. Throughout the story, Geppetto appears to be a grieving parent, a man who lost his son, Carlo. But as the truth unfolds, something disturbing becomes clear. Geppetto wasn't trying to save his son. He was trying to recreate him, and he was willing to sacrifice the entire city of Krat to do it. And by recreating Carlo into his own image, in his own mind, his own son, but not the way that his son grew up to be even when he was alive. And in regards to Romeo and Geppetto, I had already interpreted and narrated my version of my story, and it's on my channel, so check it out. It'll go more in depth about both characters. The illusion of love. What makes Geppetto such a powerful antagonist is that he believes his actions are justified. He believes he is acting out of love, but love does not manipulate people. Love does not orchestrate tragedies. Love does not turn an entire city into an experiment. Geppetto's obsession with resurrecting Carlo slowly transforms him into something terrifying. A man who believes the past can be rewritten if he is willing to sacrifice enough lives. You see, y'all might be thinking, was this entire city an experiment? In some way, shape, or form, Geppetto had a hand in all this. He helped the alchemists in parts of their experiment or observation. But all in all, it's all an experiment, mainly from the alchemists. But Geppetto took part in parts of it in retrospect of making the puppets, going around, acting kind of shady in some aspects to, to achieve his goal. And then by the end of the DLC, we had to think about, after the hard work and everything that we did, Romeo, regardless if he was on his deathbed, Leia, regardless if she's on her deathbed, those two have survived. We did all of that, and Geppetto was there, bringing the nameless puppet briefcase. So, we don't know whether they survived or not. And we can only just go further about how that equation had happened. And it's so infuriating. So sacrifices were done tremendously. Sophia's role. In contrast to Geppetto, we have Sophia. Sophia represents something very different. She does not control P. She does not manipulate him. Instead, she gives him something far more important: choice. Sophia guides P towards self-discovery, and through that freedom, P begins developing something no puppet was supposed to have: a soul. And like, we can also think in the aspect of also the pocket watch that was given to us by Sophia. You don't think much about it, but you might think like, oh, this is like from the Soulsborne games. I can easily just teleport back to my said destination. But in reality, it's something in regards to like that pretty much I can use it anytime to go back to my teleportation to Stargazer, or that it resembles very much like every time when P dies and we have the option to retry and continue, and then all of a sudden like it shows back time rewinding itself. And that in that case is also how Sophia basically pretty much turns back time for us every time, so we can help her out, help Krat and humanity and everyone else. This leads to one of the most powerful ideas in the entire narrative. Humanity is not defined by biology. It is defined by choice, empathy, sacrifice, compassion, the willingness to care about others even when it costs you something. Which means the most human character in the story might actually be the puppet. The Overture DLC. The Overture DLC adds another important layer to the story. It shows us Krat before the complete collapse. We see the early arrogance of the alchemists, the belief that humanity could control life itself. And what becomes clear is that the puppet frenzy wasn't the beginning of the disaster. It was the consequence. The real tragedy of Krat began long before the puppets ever rebelled. Humanity's true failure. The puppets didn't create the chaos. Human ambition did. Human experimentation did. Human arrogance did. The puppets were simply the final result of a system that had already begun destroying itself, what makes the story of Krat feels less like a monster story and more like a warning. And this is why Liza P resonates so deeply, because beneath the horror, the violence, and the twisted fairy tale, the story is asking a question that feels increasingly relevant. Not whether machines can become human, but whether humanity remembers what being human actually means. In the end, P's journey isn't about becoming a real boy. It's about discovering something much more important. Humanity isn't defined by flesh and blood. It's defined by empathy, choice, and the courage to care about others, even when the world around you has forgotten how. If you enjoy this narrative dive into Lies of P, let me know what part of the story resonated with you the most. Because sometimes the most powerful stories in gaming aren't about defeating enemies. They're about discovering what it means to be human.